Today we have an important topic, test-taking skills, so stay tuned. Welcome to the Speaking of Math podcast, episode number 46 by Door to Math. This podcast is devoted to all things math education and how parents can be a positive factor in their kids' math learning. Math is the gateway to many professional careers as well as confidence and personal growth. Find more information at www.doortomath.com or on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram with the call sign Tucson Math Doc. So let's get on with the topic of the day. With the spring term well underway, our kids are taking many exams, including our son, who will be taking the SAT this spring. So I always thought that taking a test is simple. You study your butt off, know all the material forward and backward, prepare yourself, and if you have a good day and everything works out, you do good on the test.
Yeah, that's a really common thing. I hear a lot of students coming to office say, I do really well on the homework, but I choke on the test. So here's a different take, which today we're going to discuss, and hopefully that'll help your students out there, your kids out there, that on the bad day you can still win. I think that's what I define as a test taking.
So you're saying that if I don't study for the test, if I'm not well prepared, I can still do better than expected.
That's pretty accurate. So thinking and praying you're going to do well on the test and prepared, it's kind of like going to the gambling house, right? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But in the end, house always end 51% of the time, and that's why they have gambling houses, right? So when it comes to test taking, take the gambling out. Think of test taking not as ace the test. Think of the test as maximize every single point that you know you can have the knowledge for. Think of that way.
All right, that seems to me a little bit of a contradiction because a test is a measure of how well you know stuff, and if everything goes right, if you know stuff, you do well in the test, and if you don't know the stuff, you don't do well on the test. Is there more than that?
Yeah, quite a bit. So one way I always show it to my students is this. Think you have to pass 2 guard houses before you can get to your house, right? So the first guard house, you have $100. First guard house wants 20% or whatever you have. So then you're left with $80, right? And then you go through the second guard house, it wants 20% and we left also, right? So a lot of people thinking, well, 80% and 80%, that's not too bad, right? No, actually 80% of 80% is 64% of what you had before. So by the time you have $100 to go through the first guard house, you have $80, right? Because they took 20%.
Yes.
Yeah, second house took 20% off that $80. So by the end, you only have $64.
All right, so the idea of guard houses, you pass each one. Can you give me examples where I lose 20% here and then 20% of that there on the test?
Yeah, so back onto the analogy, the first guard house is, let's say, the potential of a test is 100 points, right? First guard house, there is stuff you just don't know. Literally, you don't know. You didn't study for it. It was really hard. For whatever reason, you just don't know. Teacher didn't cover it. Let's say it's unfair test, right? So you have 80 potential points. Second guard house, let's say that's test taking skill, which is different than the first house. You're sloppy, you rushed it, you didn't read the question, and you copied the answer wrong. So when you come out of the second guard house, you only have 64%. Now, so 64% on any test, that's not talk about a curve or not, but 64% of any test is not a good score.
All right, so I get it that there are specific skills beyond knowing what the material is on the test that you need to know that. Is there a step-by-step process, or what are these specific skills that I want to learn once so I can do good on all the tests going forward?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. How do I fix them? So test taking skill is really about the second guard house. And you really want to going in, whatever money you have, you want all of them passed through, right? So if you only know 60% of the test, that's okay. If you come out of the test and you got a 60%, then you passed through with good testing skill. Now, that doesn't mean you have all the material covered, but that's okay. You got to fix one house at a time, right?
All right, so what are those test-taking skills? I'm very curious now.
With the test-taking skill, in the past, I break it down similarly into three things that's really important. Number one, it's pretty easy to understand: accuracy before speed. Because if you hurry and you are solving the wrong problem, it doesn't matter you got there. It's not the problem that's being asked, right? Mm-hmm. So accuracy before speed. Second thing is that double checking more often than you think, because every single equal sign, every single step you do solving the problem has two outcomes. Yes, you're still on the path. No, you fell off. So if you don't know you fell off and you keep on falling off, it doesn't matter you made the mistake on 29th step or 28th step. If it takes 30 steps to solve the problem, it doesn't matter where you fall off, you fall off.
All right, so that's two. We have accuracy before speed and double checking more often. What's the third one?
The third one is, it's kind of like a catch-22 in a way. It's believe, right? So people say, I need a good score to have good confidence in test taking. No, actually, it goes both ways. You don't really need a good score to have confidence. So a good rule of thumb is that if I go in there thinking I'm going to get 70%, I actually got 70%. That's a good test taking skill. In that sense, you have a pretty accurate gauge how much you know, and everything you know you put on there and you got credit for. Now, if you go in there thinking you aced the test, got 100%, and come out with 70, that's not a good test score, right? Something got lost. And the reverse is also true. This is the part that's really struggle for my student at the beginning. If they think they're going in there, got 70%, and they come out, got 100%, they're very happy. I see it's not a good thing, because if it can go one way, it also can go the other way. Either side, you don't know what happened to your accurate self-gauge.
Okay, so let me understand if I got the third one correct. The third one is self-gauge. If you say to yourself, okay, I think I'm prepared enough with all my skills to get an 85 on this test score, and in the end, if I get something close to 85, then I've accomplished that third skill. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually at work use the +-3. So before test, after all the preparation, we sit down and say, okay, in your gut, what do you think you can get? If the students say, oh, I think I'm going to get 80 and come back with either 83 or 77, that's a good test taking, because everything you think you got, right? But if the students come back with 100, then you either overstudied, the teacher gave it too easy test, whichever one it is, your gauge is off, right? If the students come back with a lower score than 80, that's not good either. Something else is off also.
Okay, so the third one is the newest one and the most unusual to me. How important do you think the third one is self-gauging compared to the other two?
That's a hard to say, because I think in the end, the third one is ultimate goal. Because for a kid, if you're a parent listening to this, if you have a child that's saying, I didn't study enough, and the test come pretty close to what he or she thought it was going to get, and then the child has freedom, has a power, has self-drive to say, okay, I'm going to have to study a little more. I overstudied on that one. I think I'm going to dedicate my time to do something else that's equally important to me. That gives the choice to the kid and empowers the kid. And we all say, down the road, we really can't be there for a kid all the time academically. So they will have to be able to drive and manage it themselves.
So the third one is kind of a more advanced skill. It's the culmination of some of the other skills. Is that correct? That
is correct. So if, with the three things we listed, the last one being +-3 range, I would say develop the double checking habit first, because that's one of the few easiest thing to start. And regardless how you like math or not, that's something every parent can pass it on. And the number 2, accuracy versus before speed, that's something that eventually kids will learn on their own. Last one, it has to have awareness before you can pass on that.
All right, so learn double checking first. Second, learn accuracy before speed. And the third one, the last one, is self-gauge.
Self-gauge aim to get to your gauge within plus minus 3 points. The reason that plus minus 3, I believe it's a relatively narrow gauge. That gives it gives the kids a chance to hit that gauge, and also the gauge is narrow enough so that when they don't hit the gauge, most often at the beginning they very rarely hit that gauge, and it gives them something to work on.
All right. So kids start taking a math tests maybe second, third, or fourth grade, and don't finish taking math tests until whenever they stop taking math. That can be all the way up to college or even graduate school. Are these 3 skills applicable as much in the third grade as they are, say, in the graduate school exam?
Yeah, very much. I think that as you get further and further in academic, especially when it comes to math, I think number 3 is going to be more and more important. The reason is that it's not a man-made, because if you think about it, test is teacher make those, right? So it's a man-made thing. But the self-confidence and self-gauge, that's internal. That's something going to stay with your child, and that's worth the effort to develop from as soon as you have the awareness for it.
So if your child does have this self-gauging skill, consider your child an advanced test taker.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. It takes years to get that gauge right on. And I think also one other advantage using the number 3, the plus minus 3 gauge, is that it gives you the power back to your child.
So there's 2 elements to taking a test, math test. Of course, first one is knowing the material, but there's test taking skills involved also. And knowing the material, each test you have to know new material, but test taking skills, that's one set of skills that you can develop over and over again as you move up in your math career.
Yeah, that's a really good one. On next episode, we can talk about how to do that.
All right, I think we covered for this time. We talked about test taking skills. There's in each test, there's knowing the material and knowing how to take the test. Test taking skills can add anywhere between 5 and 30 points to your test, depending on the test and how good you are at those. So it's a good skill. It's a good set of skills to learn. The test taking skills are, in the order of learning, are double checking your work, accuracy before speed, and learning how to self-gauge. And until next time,
Happy parenting.